have a question for you.
I'm sorry, but the meeting's been adjourned.
I know the meeting's been adjourned, but I would like to know how you're going to monitor the aquifer to make sure it's not being contaminated.
You want me to ask some questions?
I guess in reference to technical questions, you could certainly contact the commission office, and Mr. Sydow has volunteered to answer some questions if they're technical
He just
questions.
asked you the question, so I think maybe we ought to answer that. Obviously, there's some concerned citizens here. Mr. Sydow, if you could answer some questions, you'd probably put some people at ease here.
Okay, I'll be glad to do that. First of all, for this group, my name's Bill Sydow. I'm the director of the commission. Our headquarters office is in here. And I'll say for the record, I put out 4 invitations with various people to go to Harrison, to go to Scottsbluff, and to go to other areas up there to speak on any issue that would have come up. And I'll say I did not receive one.
Who were those sent to? Because I have personally talked to the Sioux County Commissioners, I talked to the NRD, I talked to all the media in that area, I also talked to the 3 landowners involved, none of whom received any notice.
There was no notice, ma'am. This was my verbal offer. This was my verbal offer to go and speak, and so there were never any opportunities to answer questions from our side. But since everybody's here, and I'll be glad to do that. For your question, Mr. Bauer, this well, or any injection well that we have in the state of Nebraska, is required to pass what's called a mechanical integrity test before it can be used at all. That any well will be required to be equipped with tubing and a packer that is run inside of the injection casing, and that annular space will be required to hold 300 pounds per square inch for 30 minutes before any fluid can be injected in that tubing. The purpose for that is that we prove that the casing has integrity, so that if in the future any mechanical part of the packer or a hole develops in the tubing, that all of that fluid, or any fluid that may go down the tubing and come back in the annulus, will be retained in that wellbore. It will not escape. I'll tell you for the record, and it was, and many of you were here, and on March 24th in the afternoon session, and that was the most important one. I don't know, Brian, if you were here for that. This well was actually pressure tested to 2,000 pounds on the casing before the spearfish was perforated. So we will make them retest this well to 300. If and when it's converted to disposal. But I will tell you for the record, it's been tested to 2,000 pounds already. The other thing that was mentioned in the order portion that we read is that this well had what's called a cement bond log. This is a sonic tool, standard in the oil field. That cement bond log was run from around 6,200 feet all the way back to surface, excluding some portion of the wellbore in the Pierce Shale. And that wellbore has excellent cement bond from the casing through the cement to the rock, so that there will not be any vertical motion behind the casing of any injected fluids. It is filled with cement, and that bond log demonstrates that. The other area that they ran the cement bond log was from around 1,000 feet, 1,100 feet, all the way back to the surface. That cement bond log evaluated the bond to the formation in the vicinity below the Shadron Formation, which we know has water quality that is less than 3,000 parts per million total dissolved solids. And that is required to be protected by our agency. And as well, the shallower aquifers, which do not include the Ogallala aquifer at this location, but they do include the Arickaree, which is the primary aquifer in this area for sources of drinking water, whether it be human or livestock. That particular zone only extends to about 300 feet below the surface, and the surface casing on this wellbore was run to slightly over 600 feet, and that is with a cement sheath as well. So we have evaluated the protection, Mr. Bauer, of that groundwater from this wellbore to an exceptional degree.
And we went to the ESU meeting, NRD said that they were going to put a test well in.
Monitor well.
Will they be allowed ample time to get that in? Or what's the timeline on that?
Okay, thank you for the question. The Natural Resources District for this area is the North Platte Natural Resources District. And I know there's been discussion by I'll call it an agency for lack of a better word for right now, that they are interested perhaps in drilling what is going to be called a monitor well. Typically, monitor wells are drilled by our Natural Resources District for really the purpose of seeing what the groundwater level it is in a static situation in regards to the aquifer.
And
particularly in
water quality.
Well, they can do water quality. Now, it would have to be, Brian, though, it would have to be set up so that a well like that may have to be cemented all the way through, no gravel packs. Okay, because in our drinking water wells, we have wellhead protection areas, which Mr. Rundell is on the city council at Trenton, established a wellhead protection area several years ago there. But the wells would necessarily need to be constructed so you can have no influx into that well from the top down in the gravel pack area. Because you can get contamination, and we do, of our drinking water sometimes in wells during flooding. When we have surface water, will go into the backside, the annular area that is filled with gravel, and it will percolate down and get into the water. So the NRD absolutely has all the authority they want to, if they need it or would desire to do that, to drill a monitoring well for two purposes, Brian. One, for static fluid level, and most of them, like in our South Platte Natural Resources District, are there for water levels. And that's because we're heavily irrigated in the Lodgepole Valley here. Up in Sioux County, southern Sioux County, there's really no irrigation within 5 miles of this well.
That's not even close to a true
Okay,
statement.
and my information came from our website just by putting on GIS, but within about 5 miles, I can begin to see some pivots. They're to the south, they're to the west. But anyway, they can monitor those for fluid level, and they can monitor it for water quality. They can take samples of that water, however they want to produce it, and be sent to a lab, and they can have the chemical analysis. It may be, in fact, Enviro Services up on the Beltline Highway. We used that firm for our water analysis in the past. That they can analyze that for any of the total dissolved solids or organics that might be in there. And so typically, our NRDs, if they have water quality, they might be looking for nitrates
Are
in there.
I guess my big question, who's going to pay for all this? Myself, Hewson's, Johnson's, landowners, are we going to pay for this, or are we going to charge an NRD for it, or are you going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for it?
For the monitoring
Yeah.
well? Well, I guess if you wanted to put in your own monitoring well, you could do that at your expense.
Well, obviously you haven't listened to me once. Well, why would you listen to me when I find salt water in my wells?
I'm going to answer that question. The reason we would listen to you is because we are here to prevent any damage to our underground sources of drinking water. Our entire injection well program that we have, all in Chapter 4, is absolutely designed to protect that. It is designed so that every injection well will be safely operated and none of the injected fluids will ever migrate into those underground sources of drinking water.
Who's liable if that would happen?
Ultimately, it would be the operator of a well if that happened.
Okay, so.
Great.
Now, I'm going to go on and say this. We have operated our underground injection control program under a primacy agreement from United States EPA since 1983. Our rules, our Chapter 4 rules that are published and then duly promulgated, have been published in the Federal Register. And that was probably in I'm going to say perhaps 84. I don't know a date on that. I will tell you that our injection wells, of which we have over 600 active in our inventory right now, have not had any contamination of water under that entire program, Brian.
It only takes once.
It only takes once, but let me explain
This is
this.
the only one of this magnitude that will be in the state. So you have no experience with one of this magnitude.
I believe that, I'm just going to put a couple things out here. We have about 130 saltwater disposal wells in our state under the Class 2 oil and gas field rules. I'll say right now, 4 of those wells are commercial. Of the commercial wells, we have a well south of Kimball that's operated by Z&S Construction. It's been operated since 2008. It was actually drilled as we permitted as the second horizontal well ever to be drilled in the state. It was a failure, just like the Laucomer 13-1 well was an economic failure in the deeper Paleozoic rocks. That well is completed in the Lyons. It's capable of taking several thousands of barrels a day. Now, there's probably 8 to 10 truckloads perhaps that might go to that well today. Another well that's very close to us here as we sit here, it's northeast of Potter, Nebraska. Potter's about 22 miles to the west of here on Highway 30. It is a well that's completed as well in the Lyons sand, which is not dissimilar from the spearfish. It's a bit deeper. It doesn't occur in Sioux County. That well is operated by, at this time, Devon Energy. It's 7-inch casing. It has 3.5 tubing. It has a valid MIT, and that well is capable of taking 6,000 barrels of water per day on a vacuum.
Not an
Now,
injection, a vacuum.
It's on a vacuum,
Are
yes.
the other 2 wells injection?
Well, yes, but Jane, they're all in injection. Some they might have to put a little bit pressure on. Most of our disposal wells, though, and these are different from our enhanced oil recovery injection wells in water floods, inject at low surface pressures. And so, actually, I want to get a handout here, and I'll hold it up, and we'll talk about it. So if anybody wants some handouts, they're back here.
How deep are those 2 wells?
They're about 6,000 feet deep. Very similar to this one. What this is, it's out of a 1940 publication by our Conservation Survey Division. Already got that. It's an east-west cross-section that goes through the top. It comes from Goshen County. So we'll go Goshen County, coming into northern Scottsbluff County, northern Morrow County, and northern Garden County. And you can see on the west side over here, this is the mountain front of the Rocky Mountains. and those rocks have been tilted from a vertical or horizontal into the vertical. And when that happened during the Eocene, when the mountains came up out of the ground, whatever fluids and pressures were trapped in all of these rocks, Cretaceous, all the way the Jurassic, the Pennsylvanian, there's hardly no, of the deeper Mississippian here, but there might be some Mississippian in there. All those fluids escaped to the surface and the pressure bled off. Now, over geologic time, we have had water, fresh water from snowmelt, rainwater, that begins to migrate into these reservoirs and displace fluids to the west. So that in, I'll say specifically Banner County, Scottsbluff County, we produce oil out of reservoirs that have natural waters today of less than 10,000 parts per million. So this is open to the surface, and one of the things that happened is that the bottom hole pressures bled off here, and the pressure now that we experience, at least in the Cretaceous over here, and I'm going to say in the spearfish as well, in the Jurassic section and Triassic, is very under pressure compared to any oil and gas basin or area that you would normally expect. The bottom hole pressures that we would normally expect in other states, put it that way, would be about 0.51 psi per foot. So every foot of depth you go deeper, you add a half a psi on it. Our bottom hole pressure gradients in western Nebraska, in all except for one nitrogen zone, is about 0.26 psi per foot, perhaps going up to 0.3. Now, water, if we had water and we stacked it up, the water pressure gradient is 0.433 psi per foot. And that means that with these bottom hole pressures being 0.26 to 0.3, the water pressure overpowers the formation pressure, so that wellbore will not probably be capable of standing full of water. It'll have a fluid level that'll be down several thousands of feet, as it would right now. And if this formation would, I'll say, clean up, if there's any cements that might be dissolved in the way of sulfates, then we could have a situation where the water could be displaced into the tubing and actually go on an injection, not an injection, on a vacuum. So now I believe that the bottom hole pressure in the spearfish, which is actually shown on this 1940 cross-section, that zone is about 0.3 psi per foot. As well, the spearfish sand here is what we're going to say in a geologic term, it is unconsolidated. And that means it's not cemented. I have some in my office. When they perforated it, they swabbed, they pulled some fluids out of the formation because we required this company, T-Rex, to obtain a water analysis out of the spearfish. And if they ever decided to go up one more zone, we're going to require it there. The reason being is that we will not allow any injection into any underground reservoir that contains water of less than 10,000 parts per million unless there is what's called, has been granted an aquifer exemption. Now in Sioux County, there are no aquifer exemptions. And we told T-Rex back when they were vetting this well, you guys will be required to test any zone that you are going to put your water into, because you will prove to this commission the water quality. It's going to be 10,000 parts per million or more, or you're not going to use it. And second, our injection zones that we have currently in our water floods in the Panhandle predominantly are what we call the D sand or the J sand. And so if you go on our website and you look at any well in the geologic tops, you'll see the Gurley D sand or the Cruz J sand. First production from the Gurley D was at Gurley Field, 1949, and in 1950, Ohio found a field 3 miles north that's currently a gas storage field. It was on the Cruz, Don Cruz, or actually Ray Cruz farm. They called it the Cruz J sand. So that's the nomenclature. Now, as we get further to the west and closer to the mountain uplift, and we get fresher and fresher water, because the connate waters in these formations, for the most part, were deposited in a marine environment. And assuming that the ocean chemistry hasn't changed, and we don't know that, but our ocean chemistry today is about 32,000 parts per million of total dissolved solids. Most of it is sodium, chloride. It can contain bromine, potassium, magnesium. It can also have sulfates that are dissolved. So that's about 32,000. Now, the spearfish water that we required them to obtain, we got a duplicate sample. And so my field inspector over here, Mike Sutton, was on location. He got our own sample. We sent it to Olson, what used to be Olson's Agricultural Laboratory in McCook, and ours was around 21,000 parts per million total dissolved solids. Most of it, some salt water, sodium and chloride, but much calcium and sulfate, which is kind of unusual. But if you go up to Hot Springs, South Dakota, and you drive through town and you see the red beds, when you get over by Evans Plunge, you'll see these white layers of anhydrite, gypsum. And I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but it's sheetrock is what it is. That's calcium sulfate, and we can dissolve that, and that's exactly what happened to those anhydrites that were in contact with the spearfish. So that's why that formation has higher than normal calcium sulfates. Nevertheless, with those components, it was around 21,000 parts per million total dissolved solids, which meant they could use that zone for injection. Now, these shallower zones that were of the D sand, the Gurley D or the Cruz J sand, we flat told them, Stan Ballou, who's not here, but me too, you will not be allowed to use those. Now, they're in our well depth, 4,000 feet. They will not be allowed to use them because, as I stand here, I believe that it's less than 10,000. And we told them, we're not going to grant you, we're not even going to work through any aquifer exemption for this well. It's going to fly, pass, or fail on what you get. And they did not know what they were going to get.
A question. Back to your PSI. I have a note that you said they're going to inject it at 1,500 maximum PSI at the surface. Okay. At depth, allowing 1/2 PSI per foot. It looks like it's going to be 4875.
Yes, and that's true. And that is the limit that Commissioner Oliver and Rundell decided on.
What is your minimum frac pressure?
Well, let me tell you about this sand. This sand is about, and if anybody wants to see it, I'll get it. I got a little bit. It's finer than your kids' or grandkids' sandbox.
It's like less.
It's blow sand.
So it's like the sand on top of the ground too.
Mm-hmm. And actually, Brian, that's the way the sand is. It's white. I expected it to be red, but it was not. It was white, and it's unconsolidated. It means there's no cement in it. So we asked T-Rex to conduct a step rate test on this well that would investigate the fracture pressure of that zone, because we will not allow them to inject into any well. And we don't care if it's disposal or enhanced oil recovery. They will not inject over the fracture pressure, the gradient. Now normally, and because of the tectonics here, with the mountains coming up, it put many of the rocks in compression. And so our normal pressure gradient, our fracture gradient, best is about 0.7 to 0.75 psi per foot. and that's with the bottom hole. So you're exactly right in your math. You just take the .433, that's our water column, and any pressure, we'd have to go above that to fracture stimulate, fracture that reservoir.
So you're,
So
maybe confused. You're saying frac pressure would be 0.7 PSI, and yet this will be 4,875 PSI at depth.
yes, but if
That's 4,870 higher than frac pressure.
no, the 1500 is less than
That's at the
fracture pressure.
surface.
No, we add all of it in because we are normally
Well,
going to
then I misunderstood what you said, because I do believe
We'll have
you
a column
said
of water.
that they were injecting at 1,500 PSI at surface.
That's the maximum.
Right.
That is the maximum limit.
Okay, and then the
Go.
maximum at the bottom would be
And-
4,870 PSI, higher than frac pressure.
Well, I would want to check that out as I stand here and visit with you.
It seems like you should have checked it out.
But no, it'll be below the frac pressure.
Well, the frac pressure is only 0.7, so that
Yeah,
means at
okay.
the surface, they're going to have to just let it dribble in with an eyedropper.
I'll come back to you. I just want to answer this question. This sand demonstrated no fracture gradient. The reason is because it's unconsolidated. It's not hard. You can't break it because it's just mush. So the fracture pressure that was not determined. If it's there, it's higher than was injecting at 1,700 pounds in this well at 30 barrels a minute. So this pressure is reduced from that was recommended by Mr. Oliver and Mr. Rundell. So, but we limited that. So I'll check that, but Mike had a question.
You know, I think most of us feel real confident that the commission is doing everything that they can to make sure this well itself is safe and sealed. But do you have statutes or budget, as an example, that additional dry wells in that area that were capped maybe back in the mid-'80s, is there any place where those could be pressure tested and the integrity of the tubing and plug examined to make sure that they couldn't be an access point if pressure were to increase in the spearfish?
Okay, so what Mr. Sarchet was talking about is, number one, are there any wells that were drilled in the vicinity of this well? And the answer is yes. There were several. The Houstons had a dry hole, unfortunately. The Groves have a well on a current existing well with some plugged in abandoned wells on theirs that were in that area. And so part of our responsibility, Mike, is we conduct what's called an area of review for every injection well application that we allow or might approve. That area of review investigates every wellbore inside certainly a half mile, and it can go beyond that, to see was that well adequately plugged and abandoned, and does it have the capability to prevent any fluid migration through the formation from the injection well into that wellbore, and then perhaps upwards to any water zones. We conducted that, and actually I'll tell you, this is the deal. If we ever have an injection well application, or before we even get an application, if we have unplugged wells or something that's wrong with them, we will tell that operator, you guys got to have a problem, because you may be required to re-enter and re-plug the well. And so in that case, they're like, well, we probably won't use that well, because re-entries on wells that have been plugged in and abandoned are most of the time they are unsuccessful. When we plug and abandon wells here at the Oil and Gas Commission, whether it's we call it a dry hole, where it was drilled, we require a log on every well from the bottom of the well all the way back to the surface casing. So that demonstrates if there's any water that is uncased. It shows where the depth of the surface casing was set, because that's a permit depth from us that's required. And we look at every well, literally, that we permit. We don't permit that many in a year. Last year, we permitted 231 wells. Colorado permitted 5,000. So we look at our wells. But Mike, to answer your question, we did look at that, and we, based on everything that we know, and our records and our well files are right here. Sioux County's actually right over here. Every well that was drilled out there was adequately plugged and abandoned, and there will be no fluid migration because there are cement plugs. So sometimes in water wells, it's permissible to plug and abandon a water well with clay, bentonite chips. We don't do that. We require cement be plugged or pumped down the tubing and displaced into that wellbore so that we'll have a continuous cement plug, and we require that there will be multiple plugs in every well. So on a conventional D or J sand well, let's say a J sand well here, what we require, and this is all done, there's a verbal communication that goes on when a well is drilling, that we have an on-call phone. So if you've ever called here and you say if it's an emergency or you're plugging a well, dial 308-249-0339. That's a little cell phone that myself, Mike Sutton, or Deputy Director Stan Ballou, we share that around. So we sleep with it, because drilling activity never shuts down. It goes 24 hours a day. When you start, they're going to go till they finish, and if they plug the well, they will talk to us. We don't care if it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and we will talk about where we're going to set those plugs.
I have another question. The application itself is very vague. It says they want to approve this well and others as needed. There's no limit on the number of wells in their application they are seeking approval for. And from what I heard, I did not hear the commission say that this was for only one well versus however many as may be needed in the future.
Okay. Now, whatever that application says, for your question.
I have it right here. I'll read it to you.
Yeah, we're only going to have one well, ma'am. Only one well. If anybody wants a second well, it's going to be an entirely new permit application.
Well, T-Rex has asked for more than one well.
Well,
They asked for as many
let me
as
tell you,
needed.
they're not going to get it, okay? They're not going to get it on this application, because this order that it will result is only for this specific well.
One well.
Absolutely. Now, I'm talking a lot. Question, Mr. Autry?
Yeah, Greg Autry, Star Herald. I got a question for the commissioners. I wonder if you guys had a chance to go over the letter sent to you by Speaker Hadley and signed by 6 other senators asking you to deny or delay this permit.
I'll answer the question.
No, it's for the commissioners.
Well, it came to me. Okay, and I passed it on to my commission. I'm the person who was asked to respond, to respond to that, sir. So you might have, if you read Scottsbluff Star-Herald, there was an article in there, that was yesterday, Bart. I received a letter in the mail, our morning mail, and I actually saw it about 11:30. It was via U.S. mail, and it was signed by 7 of our Nebraska state senators asking our commission to delay this decision.
Or deny.
Well, I don't know, but
I'll read it.
here, but here's the
It says
thing.
deny or delay.
We obviously approved it. We could not delay this decision because our rules and regulations say that these commissioners will make a decision on the application within 30 days of the hearing date. That's tomorrow. So the decision was going to be made, or we'd be breaking our own rules. And I don't know, Mr. Autry, about statute, but I was advised by one attorney, not on my commission, that there is also a statute that says the commission or the agency will render a decision within 30 days. Now,
And the decision could be to delay, just as a decision.
well, the application is before us, and the decision is to approve or deny. Our applications that we receive, now I'm on the County Planning and Zoning Commission, and we kind of cut the baby in half sometimes on those. But historically, at our commission, and Mr. Sontag was my commissioner for 18 years, either we approved it or we denied it.
Correct.
Every time.
Follow-up question to the commissioners. Have you had a chance to talk about the complaint filed with the Attorney General's office on the open meetings violation?
Well, my understanding is that they're investigating it, so it's in their process.
So neither that nor this letter have any bearing at all on your decision today?
Well, let me just make a general point. We have laws and regulations, and that's what we want to follow. So in a hearing, a contested hearing, evidence is presented for and against. So I would suggest that you, that as soon as the order is ready, that you review that, because that's pretty extensive. It has findings of fact, which are the evidence that was determined, that was offered, that we found as findings of fact. There are conclusions of law that sets out the statutes, the obligations, the authority that applies to this, and we applied the law to the evidence and made our order. So this isn't a matter of public policy that we're setting. We have regulations and statutes to follow, and that's what we did. So when senators contacted us about having some other type of input, as far as I know, they swore to uphold the statutes and the Constitution. And one of those statutes or regulations is that we make a decision in 30 days, and we apply the law. So that's what we did.
And they were asking you to delay the decision and so they could do some more study to make sure they were satisfied with safety. One other thing, would you go through the appeals process? How an appeal to this decision would work?
Mr. Sydow can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there's 30 days.
Yes, sir. Mr. Autry, there is an appeal process because this commission is quasi-judicial, and this decision is rendered on a hearing with evidence and testimony. So an appeal by either party, or any of the parties, would go directly to district court. The appellant, people who are appealing, the people who are appealing, they'll have 30 days basically from today, because what we will do, or I will do, is we'll make a copy of this, and Mr. Tom Sontag will get a copy because he represented the Houstons and the Groves, not Mr. Stephen Johnson. And we'll get it also to the applicant's attorney. So that's how we'll distribute that. Then either of the parties, any of the aggrieved parties, has the right to go to district court and appeal this decision. Then this decision could be appealed all the way to the Supreme Court of the state of Nebraska, because we are quasi-judicial. And I believe in this case, the last case that was appealed, we were the defendant, the commission itself, because we brought the motion on a show cause hearing, and so we were the defendant. In this case, we will not be involved. It would only be the applicant, T-Rex, and any of the protesting parties here, the truly interested parties. So this is this is a judicial process that our commissioners have undertaken here, and it can go all the way to the Supreme Court of the state of Nebraska. However long that takes.
So you're saying if the decision was appealed, the Oil and Gas Commission wouldn't be involved in that?
No. What would happen,
No, it's your
Mr.
decision.
Autry, the decision would be And we have a file. We have a case file. And in fact, every one of these files in this file bank are case files. That case file is going to contain a record of the hearing from March 24th in the afternoon. It will contain all of the exhibits offered by the applicant or anything offered by the protesting parties, the objectors. It will also accompany with it the transcript. And so our transcript, Ms. Sandy Lunnis is working on that transcript. If you were here, you know, we started at 2 o'clock and we went to about, 20 till 6. And I'm just going to say it's a lot of pages, and Sandy is working diligently on that. But that would be a part of the record, Mr. Autry, for a district court judge to review that entire file.
In your approval, what is the amount of the surety bond or performance bond required of T-Rex?
Okay.
And if there is none, why not?
Well, there is one.
Okay.
And it's $10,000 per well in the state of Nebraska.
Colorado's $1 million, that's why they're here.
Yep.
Well,
They can't even raise $1 million.
look, let me tell you about this. You bring that up, Brian. I don't think anybody can get bonded for $1 million hardly.
Sure they can.
You better be Exxon Mobil.
Colorado,
Or you're going,
they're required.
but not on a well bond, I don't believe, sir. They used to have a $50,000 facility bond. Well, ours is $10,000. It was $5,000
In your
per
rules, that
well.
only says for close, that's to cover closing a well.
That's right.
That does not cover accidents, liability, or performance.
It
And it
does
says for
cover
closing
performance.
An oil well.
This is a well under our jurisdiction. And this, if we had to call this bond, which would require a motion by the commission or an application by the commission on its own motion to call the bond. If something happened, T-Rex went away, then it's our responsibility to plug and abandon this well or any other well.
And in the event of an
And-
accident or improper practice,
Well,
T-Rex walks away.
Speculative, improper practice, because this well will be regulated and it will be reported to us.
Right, and they
by-
do the reports and send them
we-
to you.
That's exactly
Jesse
right.
James is guarding the bank.
I would
And if they walk
caution you
away-
to use Jesse James because he was a criminal, ma'am. And I would caution you not to use that in this case.
Okay, well, the performer
T-Rex or any
is
other
sending you what records he wants to send.
They are sending they are sending a representation.
How do you know that?
Well, this is how we can know that. My field inspectors over here that would be responsible for that. We have the ability by statute to go any place we need to or want to in the oil field anytime we want to.
So this,
any day we
what
want
does this $10,000 bond cover?
Plugging the well.
That covers the plugging and abandonment of this well.
Who cleans up the mess?
Well, if,
Taxpayers will get to do that, don't worry about that.
first of all, I want to just remind you that this company is on this land because of an agreement with the surface owner. Does everybody remember that?
Sure.
And that surface owner, to a degree, takes some risk for themselves. Okay? Now, we're not a party to that agreement. That is a side agreement. I'm pretty sure probably some attorney looked at that, or two attorneys looked at that agreement before it was signed. So we have a well that will be capable of injecting at low pressures, I believe, but certainly we're going to limit it. These gentlemen already cut, effectively, if we want to say it, the application in half. Second is that this well, if and when it's completed, will be monitored by this commission. And so you heard about there will be above ground extensions provided coming off every annulus. We have the ability to go there any time of the day and look and see whatever operating pressure is going on, and they must report to us on a commercial well one time a month. It will have, effectively on this well, 8 pressures, 2 for each week, and it will tell how much water went into that well. Now, how much water goes into the well? How can you figure that out? Jane?
Real quick, what about the existing well that's pumping the Bird Corman? What's the, you talked about the plugged wells. What about interaction with that or communication?
Okay, so what Jane just asked about is across the highway, across Highway 29, there's an existing well today that's pumping oil and water. And is there going to be any communication between those wells, between this injection well and this producer? And the answer is no. The cement volume that was pumped on that existing Bird Corman 31X or whatever, it comes up above the spearfish. So there is not going to be any, and that was a part of our area of review investigation, whether it's unplugged or not, there will be no communication. Second, that's to go upward in what we're worried about here today, but we don't want, the water's not going to go down because of cement from the perforations that are probably at 8,500 feet. They're probably 2,000 feet below this. There is cement in that annulus. And we require some certain volumes of cement in every well in the state of Nebraska to isolate zones from one another because we do not want fluid migration. We don't want behind the pipe that you cannot, it's tough to work on. But so that's why in this well there was a cement bond log run to prove about the integrity of that cement. So anyway, to answer the question, there's enough vertical offset and enough good cement that we won't have that. Take a little tangent here. Go.
Can T-Rex sell this well without some kind of action from the Oil and Gas Commission?
Okay. Yes. T-Rex can sell this well, just like any other owner of an oil and gas well can sell it. Oil and gas wells in the state of Nebraska are considered to be personal property. The equipment is personal property. And so those, when any installation goes in, the value of the surface facilities, perhaps the tubing in this case, will be given to the county assessor, and it'll go on a personal tax roll for a 7-year depreciation cycle. But yes, wells can be sold, just like you and I could buy your car.
I wouldn't want my car.
Well, you wouldn't want my pickup, my personal one.
What about the lease?
Well, the lease, this is my understanding on this, for this operation, there is a surface use agreement.
With the landowner?
With the Lowcomers.
Yeah, but is that's a lease, right?
I would just say it's a contract, different than a lease.
Wasn't there a lease filed in Sioux County, Hal?
I don't know on that.
It was.
It was on that.
So on a lease like that, it may or not be filed with county clerk and the public records, but it doesn't have to be. Oil and gas leases also don't have to be filed of the public record, but the owner who bought the right to produce it would be an idiot to not file that lease of record because
What I'm asking, is it transferable from one owner to another?
I do not know. That is not within our jurisdiction at all. But the wellbore is able to be sold. Now, we are not going to vet that sale, so to speak, but if T-Rex were to sell it and somebody else were to purchase that well and become the operator of record, now they are going to be required to put up a bond or post a bond with our commission just like T-Rex has.
For the plugging of a well.
Yes. And once we have, and Sandy Lunnis takes care of all of our bonding here. Our bonding is really completed in two ways. It can be done with a certificate of deposit. We'd hold that on a Nebraska bank, or it could be done through an insurance company who's willing to underwrite that. So anyway, it would be transferred by a Form 4, a sundry notice that would be sent here, notice of intent to change operator.
You kind of go on a little bit.
Well, but yes, it can be sold and...
I have another question, actually.
Can I just inject one thing? Bill, it's correct that any purchaser takes it subject to this existing order. They're still bound by the order that we've entered.
Do they have to file for a new permit?
No.
No, because the work's already done.
No. So they do not have to file for a new permit, but they must keep up with their reporting. The well has to continue to be, maintain its integrity. And in a well like this, a commercial well, we will require whoever is the operator to conduct a witnessed pressure test at least once a year. So let's say whenever all this gets shaken out, and if T-Rex goes forward, they will be required to run this tubing and packer, and we can certainly be available to witness that. We will be available to and on location to witness the 300 psi pressure test, and then they can use the well. So those are witness tests.
Okay, so a lot of what's going on here is really technical in nature, and honestly, there aren't a lot of people that are going to get all that. Can you, in a nutshell, in layman's terms, tell us what the differences are between what you passed and what was applied for? And how did you come about those deliberations?
Could I just inject one question before, and it has to do with our question. I did not hear the commission speak to any part of how they're going to clean the water, about siting a lagoon there. What are the minimum maximums on the lagoon? There was no blueprint in the application nor conversations of exactly how that process would be done.
Okay, now ask me that question again.
Go ahead.
Okay, for those of you who stayed in the afternoon session, basically this is going to be the way they're going to build this facility, however big it is. Number one, the tanks are going to be steel tanks.
Stainless steel?
No, just steel. I told them I don't want fiberglass tanks up there because fiberglass can split, and fiberglass can. So steel tanks. That's the way the oil. Well, any tank can explode if you get a source of ignition and it has anything flammable in it.
Yeah. So you're saying it's flammable?
No, no. If you have something flammable there, of course it's going to burn. And I'm going to tell you, maybe perhaps once a year in the state of Nebraska, lightning will strike a tank battery someplace. And
in prairie land for grass fires.
Well, yes and no, and this is why. Because a part of our rules say that we don't want weeds and grass on location. So that's a part of not having on active tank batteries combustible materials. But certainly if you have any hydrocarbon out in the open and you got struck by lightning, you're probably going to have some kind of a fire. Now, Bess, I will tell you, I don't believe there's going to be any lagoons up here.
They've got one there now.
How are they going to clean it?
Well, let me add, there will be no permitted lagoons. If they have anything right now, it's just a little workover pit to accept some of that fresh water that they have. But this facility will have a berm or a dike completely around it, or completely around a set of tanks. We require that for our oil tankage, and it's going to be a part of this one, even though our rules don't say they have to. I told them, and I told David Laucomer, you get that in your agreement. The second thing that this is going to have are rubber liners in the bottom of every dike system that they have. So that if anything gets spilled, or if you have a tank that leaks, and these will be 400 barrel tanks, it contains within that dike system above the liner. So we got a big bathtub, easily clean. So, but past that for lagoons, there won't be any. Now we touched on how much water could be handled on, let's say, on a monthly basis. How do we know? Well, they will know because there's two ways. All this water, our rules say, has to be trucked to a commercial well. They will know how much water they accept, and they're going to log in every truckload. Second, they will probably put a meter, a turbine meter, on there to at least confirm what they're putting in the well. So there's going to be two ways of checking what comes to the location, what goes in the well. As far as, you know, our rule, well, I'm not going to, that's going to be known, and that amount's going to be reported on a monthly basis. So, question?
Did you see the video of the lightning and the explosions at the injection well in Colorado?
Yes.
Blew the tank
I did. And
30 feet in the air. I don't think.
And you're going to put a rubber berm in, but rubber berm.
No, it's going to, the berm, the dike is going to be earthen.
And what's going to be under?
Well, it's going to have rubber underneath of it, and they'll be setting on some gravel. So the bottom line is on this is if there's any hydrocarbons that would brought in, because we could talk about stimulation water, frack water, but most of this may in fact be produced salt water that doesn't have any oil in it at all, because the guys who lifted it out of the ground will have taken their oil off before that.
But it still has benzene and toluene and all of these flammable chemicals in it.
Those things actually will come out into the air because they are very, and Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if toluene and benzene have pretty high vapor pressures, they're going to come out of solution very, very rapidly.
Then why would they blow like that?
Because there's that location had oil that was for fracture stimulation fluids. They're flowing back. They're trying to do it fast enough down there. They're not worried about saving some oil. But what those guys have and what T-Rex will have is a separation facility, or they can separate. They can take some of that oil off because they don't want to inject water or oil into their injection well because it reduces the ability to inject water.
But there was none of that conversation in the application.
Well, there was, I think.
It said it would be cleaned outside.
That's a part of it. They're going to take some of the oil off. So if they have an oil stock tank there, just like every other oil and gas battery that on the Corman's place, the Grove's place, if we have a lightning storm and it strikes there, yeah, it's going to burn up. Now, what do you get when it burns up? You get water, because we are burning carbon and hydrogens, and I don't care what it is. We're burning carbons and hydrogens, and we are making carbon dioxide, perhaps some carbon monoxide, and H2O, water vapor. And the rest of the black part in that smoke are unburned hydrocarbon particulates of the heavy kind. That's what's in smoke. So what would happen, and I hope those firefighters like down there, this is what we did actually in a candid way tell fire departments, if there's a tank battery that catches on fire, let that sucker burn up.
And let all the pasture land burn.
It doesn't burn because there are no weeds, and they can be there to monitor it, but don't try to save their oil. It's only maybe a couple of hundred barrels of oil. Forget about it. Don't
fight a land fire.
Don't worry.
The wind in Nebraska, that dike, and your no-weed zone will have no effect on what will burn.
Let me just say, best. That there are lightning strikes on tank batteries in Nebraska or any other place that has oil and gas, and tank batteries will once in a while burn up.
But
Okay,
I just
and-
want the record to be clear that
Well, there's
just
no
that
record. This is
berm
just for discussion.
is not
That
going
berm
to
is there for the
stop.
salt water
I know.
if there's a leak, and that's what we're concerned about here.
But it will not, that berm will not stop a wildland fire.
No.
Because of
Well-
the wind.
And explosion.
I had a question, Bill. I had a question.
Great, okay, I don't even know where to look
Back
anymore.
to the commissioners. I just am curious as to what prompted your decision to cut the volume in half? To go from, I think the application was 10,000 barrels a day, and you approved 5,000 barrels a day, right?
After our deliberation, more cognizant of the concerns up here. And I don't know if the applicant will ever get that kind of volume, but we felt that was a workable volume and gave another measure of safety to this project.
So in other words, that's 40 trucks a day instead of 80.
That's correct.
And when was this discussion?
These are our deliberations.
And when were those? Did you guys have a meeting to discuss this?
Can you please speak up?
Well, I'm asking if they had a meeting to discuss
We
these
had a
changes.
number of phone conversations, as we're entitled to do in a deliberative
Okay.
proceeding.
Okay, just curious.
So those weren't made public at all, those deliberations?
No, it'd be just like any judge making a decision would consider that, and by the statutes, that's permissible.
So
So the answer was just because the public is concerned, you reduced the volume?
No, not necessarily entirely on that. When we look at an operation like that, we consider a lot of different factors. The formation, the depth, the annual cement, the cement bond, those all are factors. Each well is an individual case.
Mr. Sydow, I have a
Okay, Nick, I'm gonna go to Dave. Yes, Sandra. Dave?
Why was the testimony in the morning not considered?
Okay, so the question is, your question is, why was the testimony not considered from the morning? And this is the reason. It was not testimony. It was comments and opinions. And that was strictly to allow the public who has concerns to say what they felt from their heart. And I think that we accomplished that. But again, our commission is quasi-judicial. And so the people and individuals who are involved in this are pretty much right here within a half mile and get the latecomers in there. That is set by our rules and regulations. Those are the interested persons. Now, people outside that, they were allowed to give their comment, but the real case, and this is like, and I want you to think about a court case here, because that's what went on in the afternoon. You had representative counsel, you had applicants, you had objectors, you had sworn oath testimony from expert witnesses who were qualified by the commission as expert in petroleum engineering, petroleum geology, and all of the exhibits. So this would be like if we wanted to go to a trial at our county courthouse. We're not involved. We are welcome to go. We're not going to be allowed to give any comments to the judge, but we're welcome to go and see the proceedings. But what the judge hears and takes under advisement, just like Mr. Oliver and Mr. Rundell, they go on what was conducted in that courtroom. That's the way our commission operates and always has. Nick.
Just real quick, I understand that some of processed water will be filtered at the site. I was wondering what would be filtered out of that water, and then what would be done with what is filtered?
Okay. So Nick had asked about what would be done with filtration, what would be done on this location for filters, and what would be done with the materials that results, right? Okay, so this well needs to have as high of an injection capacity as it can. And you don't want to inject anything into a well that has a lot of solids. Mud, drill cuttings, any particulates. Now, when water gets hauled, like this company, T-Rex, doesn't own their own trucks. They're going to be receiving water, and where those trucks have worked in the oil field, they could have hauled some drilling mud, which means they could have some solids in it. They do not want those solids going in that wellbore because they will either immediately go into perforation and plug up the perforation, or it'll begin to stack back on the bottom in that plug back quiet water area, and pretty soon you filled up your perforations and you can't inject anything, and now you got to put a rig back on location. So it would be solids like that, Nick, that are taken out. Those solids are exempt on any oil field situation like this. They come under rules and regulations, but not through EPA on the so-called RCRA, because they're not hazardous. Those solids could be taken to any certified landfill. Yeah.
And some states are now restricting that because of leaching. Leaching of the chemicals coming out of frack water. I can't remember them.
Okay.
I do have a question for you, though. You were quoted in an interview, and I believe it was the Omaha Herald, as saying the formations that they're going to be using can hold hundreds of thousands of acres of frack fluid. Is there any sunset or top limit on how much can be injected in that well? Hundreds of thousands of acres, to me, is...
Let me just talk to you, because how you read that, I don't think is the way it was written. And in fact, Mark, you might have, we talked about the aerial extent of the spearfish once. Spearfish, the spearfish sand outcrops of Spearfish, South Dakota. That's a long ways up there. It goes into Wyoming. It's very prevalent. So I think what I said is there are like hundreds of thousands of square miles that the spearfish occurs in or beneath. Now, this spearfish sand here, and we don't have that many penetrations, it's 80 feet thick. So stack 8-story building on that, and that's what this sand is. It has water in it right now that's at 21,000 parts per million. And the perforated interval is nearly the entire interval. So I did this calculation. It's called a volumetric calculation. And the porosity in this sand is about 30%. So if we had this sand, we put it in a coffee can or whatever, maybe we stack a little weight on it, 30% of it is going to be holes, not sand grains. The volumetric at 80 feet of sand and 30% porosity was like 114 million barrels of water in place within that 1 mile diameter circle. Now, that's kind of off the top of my head. When I did with this, and I don't know if Mr. Autry remembers this a little bit, but it was going to take, at even 10,000 barrels a day, it was going to take like 41 years if we displaced all of that water that's there right now. If we displaced it with produced water that came out of any oil and gas well, whether it's a stimulation or naturally produced, it could take about 40 years to displace that water out of that circle.
Where would it go?
So it just gets displaced into the rest of the forest. No. It all stays here, and it stays in the zone. We're open to the surface on that cross section. So if we went through a calculation on that, and I don't want to do that, I'm telling you that if we injected 100 million barrels, maybe we might affect that local pressure right in there by maybe a couple of PSI, a couple of pounds per square inch. Not 100, not 1,000, a couple. So this is done in every disposal well that we have. We put water in, and typically in Nebraska, all of them are very low pressure. They're at that 0.26 PSI per foot.
Over that 41-year period that you were mentioning, about how many square miles would that cover?
The area, Steve, just inside the half-mile circle. Just inside the half-mile circle.
1/2 mile circle.
Yes. And you know what? You're here, I want to say something else. I received a map of Sioux County, and it was generated by Mr. Dan Skavdahl. And Mr. Skavdahl is involved in a company called Sioux Land. Anybody ever hear of that? Sioux Land. I would like you to get a copy of that map, and I would like you to see about what percentage you think of Sioux County is currently leased for oil and gas exploration.
I mean, the oil's there.
That doesn't mean it's there, but it's leased, and somebody's interested in drilling for that. And I hope that the industry is successful, because for a number of reasons. But I hope they're successful. But if they're successful, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you, they're going to produce a lot of water. And I mean probably a lot of water. And they're going to have to handle it.
Okay, it's the Nebraska water.
Well, maybe we can send it to Colorado.
Take precedent.
Well, we have.
In exchange.
We have sent water to Wyoming from the wells that were drilled on the last two up there, which were drilled in, well, not the last two, in 2012. Fidelity drilled and completed 2 wells. One on the Groves property was called the Sioux Ranch, number 1. And there was another well that was drilled up to the north, and it was called the V-Bar 1 Cattle Company, number 1.
With that many
And
disposal
those wells,
wells in Nebraska, why did we have to send water to anywhere else?
because we had no disposal wells in the northern panhandle. We don't have one disposal
You've got
well
one in
up there.
Kimball. Why would you send it to Colorado and Wyoming?
It went to Wyoming because it was closer.
Well, we'll keep our water,
Closer.
they can keep theirs.
Well, in fact, it's the same water, ma'am, because the formations are the same.
They're reaping
So
the
what
money off the oil.
what they produce, we produce.
They want-
So
they
the
give
fact of the
tax
matter
dollars.
is that if the industry is successful in this county, or Scottsbluff County or Banner County in the Paleozoic section, we're going to be producing water. And the industry is going to need some additional disposal wells. Now, I would tell you, if that happened, those disposal wells are not going to be commercial. They're going to be private. And it'll stay on somebody's ranch. And that's somebody who gave the oil and gas exploration company the right to explore and drill and produce wells is going to be subject to that lease. And we potentially will have additional disposal wells in Sioux County on ranches. I don't care if it's the FX Ranch. Mr. Johnson, I hope that Hawkwood has a chance to drill, to make some wells. They're completing Mr. Johnson's wells right now. One, the King 1618, Hawkwood.
I'm not Johnson.
You're not? I'm sorry. So what's your name?
Joe Eads.
Joe. I'm sorry. I knew that too. So my apologies.
But what I'm saying
But
is,
that water is now being hauled down to Kimball. But it's being hauled 90 miles on pretty much this route. But I'm just saying that in the future, if we, as a state of Nebraska, have oil and gas production that is commercial and viable in Sioux County, we will need more disposal wells.
okay, how far is it from the fields in Colorado to the field or the well in Sioux County? It's more than 90 miles. Why would they haul it over here?
Well, they may not. They may not. In fact, the wells, and so it becomes a matter of economics. They won't. And Colorado is permitting about perhaps 1 well per month.
So that's not what T-Rex said.
Well,
They said they were going to bring it from Colorado.
no, they would
Sydow
have.
fields in Wyoming.
They have the opportunity, ma'am,
Right,
to
that's
take
what they
that
say.
water, and this is why, is because This injection well program is a federal program. These wells can only accept fluids that come from the oil and gas operations.
Why wouldn't they
That's
take it
it.
to Kimball? It'd be closer.
Well, maybe the operator in Kimball, and I'll tell you candidly, that's their well. They are the ones that are going to haul the water to it with their trucks, and they're not going to let anybody else into their commercial well. That's their decision. It's just like...
What about the rest of these? You said there's 140 injection wells. How many are on this end?
Well, we have disposal wells. We've got about 120, but we only have about 4 commercial wells. So, however, these 120 wells in Nebraska, it would be, Joe, I'm gonna pick on you. If you had your own oil company and you had your own production on Mr. Farringer's lease, you could have your own disposal well. You're going to jump through all the hoops for us, but you can have it on your property. But your water is the only water that's going to go in that well.
But would it be feasible to drill one on your own property? What is it, $1 million to?
It depends on how deep the well is. These wells in Sioux County, I checked with Hawkwood Energy. These wells have an estimated completed well cost of $3.3 million to the wells like are being drilled right now.
Say, would it be feasible if you had a well on your own property to spend the $3 million to put in a wastewater well?
Well, it depends on how much oil production you have. It depends on how much oil production you have. I would say yes, it always is, because the well that that would be drilled typically, let's say the industry's successful, they have additional wells that are drilled. They're going to be like this spearfish. They're not going to go to 8,500 or 9,000 feet. They're going to TD at 6,000, and they don't have to go through all the salts. There's a big salt section up here. They don't have to have weighted mud to get through the bubblegum shales. Substantially different well costs. So you could probably drill and complete a 6,100 foot well. My guess, $650,000, $700,000. Now, but it comes down to economics.
The same standards though as
Absolutely. It doesn't. So our standards at our commission, ladies and gentlemen, do not change. If it's a private well, if it's a commercial well, if it's an injection well in water flood or for disposal, they don't change. They're going to meet all of the qualifications per our rules and regulations, or they're not going to use the well.
Why don't we in Nebraska have rules that are half as stringent as they are in Colorado? And Wyoming is now beefing up theirs. Ours are sadly lacking compared to our neighbors.
Okay, I'm just going to tell you, I absolutely disagree with your conclusion on that, Bess. Our rules are not sadly lacking. Our rules are absolutely, I think, across the board. They are simple, they are concise, they are very broad. They give us, as a commission, a lot of latitude to meet certain situations. And what's happened, and I'm not going to bash them because they're my friends, is our commission, we have 8 people. We have over 200 years of experience in our commission, in oil and gas. And so when you go, you can say goodbye to Edna, because Edna's worked here for 50 years. On April Fool's Day, I told her when she was 40, I said, what kind of a fool Edna is going to work here for 40 years? Edna's 50 years. And she takes care of all of our don't have a professional designation here. They are professionals, and they maintain their part of their business very well.
I'm not challenging
I'm just saying,
personalities or the credentials.
first of all, we don't have the activity, and our rules, I believe, are absolutely effective to accomplish all of our environmental protection.
We testified, and the geologist, this well will induce oil companies in mass to come to this state and drill, which I don't think is a very fair statement. But given that they say that is going to happen, are we looking at strengthening our rules or anything so that we are not going to get more Wyoming, Montana, Colorado frack water disposal in this state versus theirs? They get the revenue from the oil. We do not.
Okay.
If we got the revenue from the oil,
It wouldn't make any difference to anybody, would it, Bess?
Well, yes, it would.
Why would it? Is it
We
just
would have a
money?
much bigger taxable base. There would be a reason.
When we
for-
establish oil and gas production in our state, in this particular facility, if they build it as big as it was, do you remember what their cost was? $4.7 million? That's what they estimated. Do you know, ladies and gentlemen, that that goes on personal property tax roll today, as soon as they build it
But
in Sioux County?
and an oil well would bring in a lot more.
Well, yes, but we've got to have, here's the thing. Is it the chicken or the egg a little bit? We had an exploration program when I did not live here in the early 1980s. And so you remember there was the oil embargo. Oil went to $38 a barrel in 1981. And there was a lot of activity that was created. Price collapsed. But in Sioux County, there were some very significant wildcat wells were drilled by True Drilling Company from Casper, as well as Mr. Robert T. Birdsong. He had Bird Oil and Gas. And they drilled the Corman well. They drilled the Houston wells. They drilled a number of wells. They found some production. It wasn't that good, but then the price really collapsed in 1985, and we had the other 2 million people lose their jobs in the United States. And so it's languished. It's languished because of price, and it's in the middle of, I'm not going to say the middle of nowhere, but it's remote, right? And there aren't any oil field services up there. You're going to have to come out of Commerce or Brighton City or Casper.
Or Mr. Rundell's oil service.
Well, Mr. Rundell is not in the well service business. He doesn't have drilling rigs or anything.
But he supplies to the oil fields.
No, Mr. Rundell is capable. He's a very good well site geologist, and that would be if he does that work anymore. It's just a contract day rate.
Is the disposal wells will not bring anything like the revenue that a producing oil well will bring. The disposal well will not increase the availability of oil.
No, it will not increase the availability of oil, but what it does do is it gives them, on this particular well, it gives somebody else the opportunity to use this well, just like Hawkwood is doing now. They're hauling that from Mr. Stephen Johnson's place down 29 to 26 to 71 to back on the county road, and I don't know how many truckloads a day. They could go 5 miles. Now, that changes their economics substantially. And if we find a field, and I'm actually working on this because Bess is sensitive to it, but oil and gas properties are evaluated every year by our county assessors, your county assessor. And it is evaluated every year for what's called fair market value, which means there's an economic forecast run to the life of that well by some guys from Texas. Now, I'll just tell you, one county in Nebraska, it's Hitchcock County. And I have the numbers from Mr. John Rutledge. Hitchcock County went from a value of like about $35 million in oil and gas as a part of their real estate tax base in 2003 to about $137 million. Now, not everybody gets that money, but in that county, or any of our other counties, what that oil and gas tax base serves to do is it lowers our mill levies a little bit because it's some kind of additional source of tax, so we don't have to pay such high taxes on our houses or our farms and ranches.
That was production wells.
That's exactly right.
Not disposal wells.
Well, we have got to drill more producing wells. The industry, and I don't control.
And if we don't have the oil and the price isn't up high enough, then we are not going to get that much oil play over here. We don't have the pools of oil that Colorado
It depends best on what they find. In this business, you can never say never.
No, I didn't say never.
But I know. But
we know
this is a
for
part.
a fact.
This is a part of it. At the oil field in Nebraska, we produced in 2014 21. The industry did. They lifted about 21 barrels of water for every barrel of oil they got out of the ground. 21 barrels. What do you do with that? Well, we inject about 92% of that, either in saltwater disposal wells or it goes back in our water floods. And so injection like this has been done in Nebraska since in the mid-1950s, before there was a commission. Before there was a commission.
So T-Rex doesn't have to take Nebraska Oil.
They can take any water that comes from the oil field operations.
Right.
What if they're already taking 40 truckloads a day and we get into some oil production in Sioux County, and there's no place to go with it?
Then somebody's going to drill another disposal well, and there will be another application just like this one that'll say this is how the well's going to be drilled and completed. We would permit it. It'd be a brand new grassroots well. So we would permit it. We're going to put requirements for casing and cement on that well. They can drill it before, but they have to go through an application process.
So that they could only be taking Colorado water then?
Now, on the new well?
No, on this one.
Oh, no, they could take any water. They could take all Nebraska water.
But it's limited to from oil well production, not any other chemical.
That's right, Dave. It is limited just from oil and gas operations. It can't come from pipelines. It can't come from refineries. It can't come from tank farms. It is just oil and gas.
Or pharmaceuticals.
Or no pharmaceuticals, no blood out of a packing house, nothing, just oil and gas operations, which for the most part is some form of salt water. It could be 5,000 parts per million like some in Scottsbluff, or it could be some we've got here 100,000 parts per million. But we won't let them put anything over 10,000 in a pit. And in fact, the volumes are so big, even in western Nebraska, we've got evaporation potential of like 116 inches a year. You can't evaporate that much water.
Do you have a maximum size on the lagoon they're going to have?
I told you, Bess, there is no lagoon on this location.
No,
This location
you said they
has
are going to
no-
have, we'll call it a pit or call it a lagoon.
That's for just right now. This is all going to be above ground. They are not going to dispose of any water into a pit.
Well, I'm not talking about for disposal. There is going to be a pit, a lagoon or something where it's part of their cleaning operation.
No.
So there will be,
No.
it will be flat. That lagoon that's there now will be covered up.
Yeah, and so don't call it, it's not a lagoon. But this
Okay,
water
man-made
is
lake.
going to have to be, I'll have to go see this. I need to see what you're talking about.
There's
And
a
I will go
lagoon up there right now.
I've got a question. Did you or any of your commissioners drive down the street in front of the Mitchell School where all these trucks are going to be going? Drive down the narrow highway with steep shoulders to get to this well site?
Mr. Sutton has been on that because he spent some
no
time up
concern
there.
about putting all that down in front of the Mitchell School?
Well, let me tell you, sir, we have no jurisdiction over any traffic situation. And that's why I asked the State Patrol to come last meeting so they could hear concerns. We have no jurisdiction over any county road or any state road or federal highway. The people that have jurisdiction are the State Highway Patrol, the county sheriff and his officers, or the local municipal chief of police. They have jurisdiction over that. Now, I want to ask you though, and I'm not going to ask an answer right now, how many trucks go by that thing during beet harvest or hauling cattle, or they go by it right now? I don't know the answer, but it's being used.
I will send you a picture of the
You
lagoon.
say you'd like to see more oil production in Sioux County. How many dry wells are there right now for the last 50 some years? There's a lot, aren't there? There's no oil, productive oil in Sioux County. You and I know that. It's not there. So why are you pushing for more oil wells?
Well,
We don't want them up there. Why are you?
Okay, that you can speak for yourself that you don't want them. But if you look at the lease map from Mr. Dan Skavdahl, you're going to find that about 70% of that surface area in Sioux County is leased for active oil and gas leases.
For $10 an acre.
There's not going to be well there.
That's up to the land. That's up to the mineral interest owner.
We
I'll
lease-
tell you, I think their stuff went for $100 an acre up there, and it was by Whitmar Exploration Company. And it was also LaFrac was up there because LaFrac bought into the deal that Fidelity took. And I'm telling you, there were millions of dollars spent on leasehold bonuses up there. Now, those oil and gas leases are intact. And if if hot wood probably doesn't do any good on their wells. We permitted 4 wells last year. They drilled 2. They cored them, they hole cored them. I'll tell you that I think there was a lot of oil in the rocks that they cored. They ran casing, they shut their operation down for the winter. Then they came back and they're completing it right now. And they've got a big pumping unit on a well that's called the King 1618. It's about 5 miles north of this Louthammer well, just back off to the highway. There are oil field trucks that go by there probably every day hauling water now, same back route, just to haul water. So I hope that we find, the industry finds oil and gas in more places in Nebraska. I hope that. I want that. I think it's good for the economics of any region.
What's the economic good except for that person on that ranch, for instance? But you didn't answer my question about the...
Oh no, that's okay. I'm glad to hear, and if you ever want me to come up there,
Keep going, yeah.
Brian, I will, but I didn't want to go up there uninvited, and so I'd asked Rosemary, and I asked Dan Sydow, and I asked Chip Blaha.
I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Keep going.
Okay.
We also pay taxes on these highways where that other wouldn't.
Okay.
Repair.
Let me answer something about taxation and highways. Nick paid gasoline tax when you came out here today. We got a pretty high gasoline tax in the state of Nebraska because a little over half of it. It is.
I'm talking about the repair.
Well, the
Are they
repair comes
repaired?
out of the budget of the Department of Roads. That's where the repair is done for our state highways, and it's also done for our federal highways, and they're gonna have a work plan, right, to do that. Now, I think our Department of Roads, there's more work to be done every place, but not enough money. And so I'll tell you candidly, I was in Lincoln several months ago, and one of my people I work with in the legislative offices said, "Have you seen that road department estimate?" And I said, "No, for LB 512, Senator Stinnersville." I said, "No, I haven't seen it." I said, "What is it?" She says, "It's like $6.5 million. And this is what I said. I said, "Well, good. $6.5 million. That's the only way we're going to get any money to come to western Nebraska to fix up our roads is if they have to do it. And maybe that's not a bad thing. So maybe we should have some more wells out there so we can get the rest of our roads fixed up." So, and that, I said something like that, okay?
If if an oil company has leased your land and you've sold mineral rights, and the well is closed like at Lockmers, do the people that have mineral rights have any say about this injection? Or is this totally a bizarre question?
No. Actually, if they own minerals like inside of that half a mile, yeah, they could be affected. But when you have, here's something that's kind of interesting. We think of surface estates, right? Because that's what we walk on. But did you know that the holes in the rocks probably belong to that surface owner? Not the minerals, not the coal or uranium or oil and gas, because those are minerals. Those can be, and they commonly can be severed to some, like if I was your son, Mom, I hope I get half the minerals, And so you can do that. And so mineral estates can become severed and become lower and lower to any individual, but it all adds up to 100%. And so on a disposal well, we don't really care how it works out, if it's under an oil and gas lease or if it's under a surface use agreement like with Mr. David Loudon. He owns the holes in the rock. And it's something we don't think about. But that issue has come up as we've begun in our United States to talk about carbon dioxide sequestration. And you want to talk about big volumes of stuff? don't think we can ever do that. But those volumes make this look absolutely puny.
Well,
But
my concern is, in the past, my father sold some of our mineral rights, and I have tried to research and get those back. And some people have 1/500th interest.
Yes.
Now, do these people have to be contacted if I choose to have an injection?
They do. I work for Lacey County. They do. They own
So that would
a
involve
teeny
that many
percent.
people in approval of an injection.
Well, they could become and object, just like the Hewsons did, because their real estate is being affected in that half mile. Bess is absolutely right on that. And
As
so,
long as that well is there, I could be wrong, but I believe that well could be, even though it's capped, could be considered a holding well because until that oil